I am dreaming of the mountains of my home, of the mountains where in childhood I would roam. I have dwelt 'neath southern skies where the summer never dies, but my heart is in the mountains of my home. I can see the little homestead on the hill. I can hear the charming music of the river. There is nothing to compare with the love that once was there in that lonely little homestead on the hill. Churchyard down below, where the mountain breezes wander to and fro. And when God my soul shall keep, it is there I want to sleep, with those dear old folks that loved me long ago. I am dreaming of the mountains of my home, of the mountains where in childhood I would roam. I have dwelt 'neath southern skies where the summer never dies, but my heart is in the mountains of my home.
If this were a live, in-person service, I might have persuaded Joyce to come to the microphone and share some of her memories of Roger with us. But since this is a different kind of service where we are gathering in front of a screen, I will read Joyce's memories of Roger while you look at some old pictures of him. Roger was the fifth and last baby to be born into Jeter and Mary Paris's family. The age range between the oldest and the youngest in the family was 21 years. In the summer of 1952, Jack and Joyce went to visit their aunts in Asheville. Family members told Jack and Joyce that there would be a surprise waiting for them when they got home. These family members wanted Jack and Joyce to guess what that surprise was. Joyce thought maybe a refrigerator. As it turned out, the surprise was far more valuable than a warehouse full of refrigerators. While the family could surely have found room for a refrigerator, finding room for this new baby boy would not be so easy. Roger's siblings always kidded him that he pushed Evelyn and Dot out of the nest. Now that's not hard to believe, since Evelyn married George when Roger was less than a month old, and Dot married Don about 3 months later. Evelyn took Roger to her home on weekends. He would stand at the window while calling for Nana. Everyone thought he was asking for a banana, but he was calling for Evelyn. Roger was only 15 months old when he first became an uncle. That's when I came along. Mike, not Joyce. George followed 9 months later, then Doug, and then Anita. There were only 5 years separating Roger from the first wave of nephews and nieces. Visits to the family's White House were always special. Boasting 3 porches and a magical staircase, the old house was an incubator for imaginary adventures of every variety. Joyce remembers us kids running in and out. In the front door, up the stairs, down the stairs, out the back door, and repeat. Mother, or grandmother as she was known to the grandkids, delighted in the pandemonium that her grandkids brought to the house, led by none other than Roger. Now, keep in mind that Roger was only 2 years old when George was born. Well, one day when George was 2, maybe 3 years old, Evelyn took him to the doctor. The doctor noticed George had several bites and bruises on him, but he was unconcerned until he learned that George's uncle had bitten him. All of a sudden, he was alarmed, but he quickly calmed down when Evelyn explained that this notorious uncle was only 2 years older than George. Roger and George liked to go to the dime store in Silva. When they got inside, Roger would count George's money for him so that he would have an idea of how much he could buy with his money. George was much larger than Roger, so to a casual observer, one of the boys looked smart and the other one, maybe not so smart. When Roger and George fought, disagreed, George would pull Roger's hair and Roger would bite George. Perhaps this is why Roger has no hair on top of his head in most of these pictures. When Mother would try to separate the squabbling boys, Roger's dog Pooch would think Mother was hurting the boys and would chase her back into the house. Roger attended Scotts Creek Elementary, Silva Webster High, and Southwestern Community College, where he graduated as valedictorian of his class. Roger enrolled at Southwestern after having lived in Florida for a short period of time. It's about 1980. The admissions counselors at Southwestern informed Roger that he was considered an out-of-state resident and would have to pay out-of-state tuition. Not only did Roger have to pay out-of-state tuition, he was also regarded as a Floridian, which of course was the ultimate insult. Roger went ahead and enrolled at Southwestern anyway, even though he was regarded as a Florida person and had to pay the extra tuition. He was probably steaming inside, but Roger almost always managed to maintain self-control, except for the times when that little sports car he used to drive wouldn't start. That thing just did not like cold weather. Well, one cold, dark morning when Roger was getting ready to go to work, his car wouldn't start. And so Roger did what any reasonable, level-headed person would do. He kicked his car. Now, the kick didn't get his car to start, but it did break Roger's toe. Now, I don't know this for sure, but if you were to go back and check the registration records, I'm pretty sure you would discover that this car was originally from Florida. When Roger landed a job at Western Steer, he came to Charlotte to shop for clothes for his new job. He was rather slender at the time and very picky about what he wore. It took Roger and George almost a week to stop in at virtually every clothing store in Charlotte to find just the right clothes. Joyce told her little brother that if this job didn't work out and he had to take a job digging ditches for a living, then he would have to wear those clothes. If I had to choose one word to describe Roger, I think it might be the word servant. Roger was always helping everybody, especially his parents and his family. You were always given a royal welcome at Roger and Nell's house. They always fixed your favorite food when you came. And if you visited at just the right time of year, you might go home with a sack full of new potatoes. When we think of Roger, we can't help but think of family reunions. Mother had always wanted the entire family to get together. Unfortunately, we did not do so until after her passing. At first, we got together in mid-August, close to her birthday, but later changed it to the last weekend in July so it wouldn't interfere with those going to school. It just so happened that Roger's birthday was the last week in July, and so Roger always had a lot of family members around to help him celebrate his birthday. The first get-togethers were in Cullowhee at the park shelters on Saturday afternoons. Later on, multiple generations of family and friends had the opportunity to enjoy each other's company on the peaceful mountaintop known as Miracle Mountain. Roger and Nell named it that because of all the obstacles they had to overcome getting their home established up there. In recent years, the family reunions were known as the Flamingo Fling. The first such fling took place in the year 2000. That year was not a milestone birthday for Roger. It was his 48th, and the celebration was not officially planned with a flamingo theme in mind. It just kind of spread by word of mouth. Miracle Mountain was covered with flamingos of all sorts, pink lemonade, and pink and black balloons at the mailbox. This trend continued until 2020 as the flamingos were quarantined due to the COVID pandemic. Roger was smart. He and Nell figured out how to have grandkids without having kids. Ironically, Roger became the patriarch of the family, even though he was the youngest. Our parents surely would have been proud of how he and Nell kept the family together. Our family is indeed richer and stronger because of Roger.
I am a poor wayfaring stranger while traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright world to which I go. I'm going there to see my Father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie out before me, where God's redeemed shall ever sleep. I'm going there to see my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I'll soon be free from every trial. My body sleep in the churchyard. I'll drop the cross of self-denial and enter on my great reward. I'm going there
to see my Savior, to sing his praise forevermore. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Memorial services like this one have a way of helping us put life in perspective. We don't often look for perspective in life. We're just too busy with the responsibilities and pressures of life to pause and consider life in perspective. But when someone we love dies, we need perspective to help us deal with our sorrow and to give us hope. There are so many observations about life and the meaning of life that we could make, but I have condensed what I want to say into two brief perspectives on life. One is the sentimental perspective, and the other is the theological perspective. First, the sentimental perspective. I want to ask you to indulge me for just a minute or two while I summon a few deeply cherished memories from the early 60s. I want to go back to those days when the first round of nieces and nephews would get together for a weekend visit or maybe a longer summertime visit at that big old White House with the three porches that Joyce referred to earlier. Sweet are the memories of rhythmically rocking back and forth while the creek just across the road simultaneously beckoned even young children like us who had a seemingly endless supply of energy to slow down and savor the moment. In recalling such sentimental memories, I can't help but reach back into the recesses of my mind and recollect those frequent trips across that old iron suspension bridge, across the railroad tracks, and then up that steep winding hill where it would take us to that little country store that sat beside the highway. There wasn't a whole lot of merchandise in that little store. It wasn't a very big building, but it did have something that kids today know probably nothing about: penny candy. You could buy all sorts of sweet tasting things to put into your mouth for just a penny a piece. Bubble gum, Kits, Tootsie Pops, peanut butter logs, bit of honey, and even fireballs, all for only a penny each. But you had to make sure that you only bought 9 pieces of penny candy at a time. That's because Louis Blanton, who owned and operated the store at that time, had a little sign by the cash register that said, 1 cent tax on each 10-cent purchase. So we had to figure out a way to get around that. So we asked Mr. Blanton for 9 pieces of candy, gave him a dime, he gave us the penny back, and then turned right around and asked for another piece of candy. So matching wits with Mr. Blanton and watching him get all flustered and grumpy actually was half the fun of going to that store. The other half was, of course, getting the penny candy. But then there was a trip back down the hill and back over the railroad tracks and the bridge again. And this time we come to one of those 3 porches to sit on and enjoy that treasure trove of penny candy we had in our bags. My personal favorite was the spot on that screened-in back porch. It seemed to be a never-ending supply of comic books that had not been read, and my favorite in those days, Mad Magazine. Perhaps it was those comic books featuring Donald Duck and his 3 nephews that prompted George and Doug and me to began to refer to Roger as Uncle Roger. So, I mean, nobody called anybody uncle or aunt in the family as far as I could remember. We didn't refer to the husbands of our aunts as uncle. And so it was kind of a novelty to call Roger, who is just a year or so older than we were, our uncle. And it seems that for the rest of his life, that Roger would be known to the family, or at least to the nephews and nieces, as Uncle Roger. We miss him. We miss Roger. We're going to miss him for a long time. And with Roger's passing, it's only right to acknowledge that an era has come to an end. It's similar to the end of an era when Granddaddy died, or Daddy to his children. His passing in 1973 signaled the end of the family home with 3 porches. In 1991, another era came to an end when Grandmother, also known as Mother, passed away. Both the patriarch and the matriarch of the family had completed their time in this life, leaving a big gap to fill. But Roger, along with Nell, filled that gap. The youngest son became the patriarch. Coming to his house for family reunions would fill the gap left by the absence of the grandparents. And though Roger and Nell did not have children of their own, they became something akin to surrogate grandparents to some family members and perhaps even parent figures to others. But for me and my generation, Roger filled a gap that only he could fill, a gap that straddled 2 generations and kept this family tightly connected. Younger nieces and nephews may not have memories of that house with the 3 porches, but they, along with us older folk, will have tender memories of driving up Miracle Mountain, past the flamingos, up to this homestead on the hill with a million-dollar view. So whatever memories of Paris family gatherings you cherish most, whether it's those memories of the old White House by the creek or the homestead atop Miracle Mountain, at the core of those memories is the one untimely born who made being part of this family such a great blessing, Uncle Roger. The pictures and the memories they revive have likely evoked some tender emotions. In waxing sentimental, it's not my intent to inflict undue pain on any of you. But it is impossible to remember someone whom we dearly loved without shedding a tear or rekindling a pleasant memory. Sentimentalism offers us a perspective on life that we truly need in order to deal with our sorrow and hold on to hope. But we need more than that. We need more than a sentimental perspective on life to help us deal with life and death. We need a theological perspective. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at God. Both of them are found in the parable of the prodigal son. The story goes like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that's coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate. No one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said to the servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you. I never disobeyed your command, and you never even gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Now, I love this story for a number of reasons. Perhaps most of all, I love the story because it showcases the boundless grace and mercy that the Father lavishes on both sons. But the story also starkly illustrates two ways of looking at God. The first way of looking at God is found in the younger brother. He didn't believe his father, who represents God in the story, owed him anything. The younger son understood that his father would be completely justified in cutting him off completely. But he was relying completely on his father's mercy. On the other hand, the older brother had a different view of God. He believed God owed him something. That thinking goes something like this. I've lived a pretty good life. God owes me something for that. He owes me some comfort. He owes me a good life. And he shouldn't let bad things happen to me. You know, the attitude of the younger brother could be described as being poor in spirit, whereas the older brother embodies an attitude that might best be described as middle class in spirit. The middle class in spirit goes something like this. I've worked hard, I've done my duty, God owes me something for that. He should not let anything bad happen to me. Life should go well for me. But what happens when life doesn't go the way you expect it to go? How do you respond? Well, often the response is something like this. That's not fair. That little phrase is one with which we are all very familiar. This simple little expression reveals our expectations. We want something to go a certain way, and we believe it should. And when it doesn't, well, that's when we hear ourselves saying, that's not fair. Life is not always fair, at least by our way of reckoning. In a perfect world, parents die before their children. The oldest siblings die before the youngest. But in a really perfect world, nobody dies or gets sick or hurt at all. This is what we really yearn for. We yearn for perfection. We yearn to be perfect, living among perfect people in a perfect world. If we go all the way back to the beginning, after God created the heavens and the earth, and then he took the dust of the earth and formed it into his own likeness and blew into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living soul. And everything was great for a while. It was perfect. It was paradise. But then that serpent sneaked into the garden. He beguiled the woman, and she took the forbidden fruit, and she gave it to her husband, and they both ate. And they were suddenly aware that they had sinned, and that things could never be the same again. I think it's good to just pause for a moment and recognize that, man was created to be a perfect being, to live in a perfect environment. And as long as we are perfect and the world around us is perfect, we can handle that pretty well. But we don't live in a perfect world, and none of us is anywhere near perfect. It's because sin has corrupted humanity. It's corrupted the world. We see people offering all kinds of remedies to make the world a better place, and to be fair, there is merit in wanting to make the world a better place. We have cures or vaccines for a number of diseases, most recently COVID, and we're glad about that, but no one has come up with a cure for sin, because you can't get rid of sin by creating new laws or a serum or a vaccine or anything like that. Only God in Christ could do something about sin, and that's what the cross is all about. God offers the gift of forgiveness of sin freely to anyone who realizes he doesn't have enough righteousness of his own to overcome his sin. In other words, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The biggest problem the human race has is theological in nature. We are sinners, every one of us. And we're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we are sinners. We are sinners by nature and by choice. And only Christ can save us. Well, I'm fairly certain that some of you may not see the gospel of Christ as a source of comfort. Instead, you may feel tense or disturbed or even angry with me for bringing God into the conversation. I realize I'm taking the risk of offending you, but we will never have the hope of being perfect people living in a perfect world apart from God. This is why it's so important that we talk about God and our need for Him. We need the perspective that theology brings. But I do have to admit that sometimes talking about God does make us uncomfortable. We've taken God, or the God element, out of life. And this is really nothing new. After Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, they hid themselves from God, or at least they tried to. They were obviously uncomfortable with God, even though they desperately needed Him. And even now, I suppose that some of you may be uncomfortable when I brought God into the conversation. Nevertheless, you desperately need Him. We all do. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Roger. Actually, it was the last face-to-face one-on-one conversation I would ever have with Roger. It was 3 years ago at the family reunion in 2018. I had no idea that this would be the last time I would see Roger. As supper time drew near, Roger asked me to come along and assist him with getting the food that he had ordered from a restaurant in Cherokee. So we had a little bit of a drive, and as we're driving down the highway, we're kind of catching up with each other and just reconnecting. And but before too long, there was a lull in the conversation, and we both just kind of sat there, neither one saying anything. And then I felt this strange prompting. This prompting that said something like this, say something to him. And I recognized that prompting. I'd felt it many times before. It seemed that the Spirit of God was nudging me to speak to Roger about spiritual things, but I was reluctant to. I'd tried that before, and it didn't really go well. There was this awkward silence and just great discomfort, and I was afraid that that conversation might have damaged our relationship. It didn't, but it was awkward at the time. And so, wasn't sure what to do, but Roger didn't say anything to break the silence, and so I thought, well, I'm going to go for it. And so I just blurted out something like this. Hey, Roger, when the time comes for me to leave this earth, am I going to see you in heaven, or do we need to have a conversation about that? And then I sat there and waited for the awkward silence. I kind of stared at the floorboard for a moment, and then glanced over at Roger. I mean, there's no place for him to go. He's driving, the SUV, and we had to get the food. So he was kind of in a captive place. He wasn't saying anything, but his face was communicating something. He had broken out into a very wide grin, and his eyes were sparkling. And he assured me that, yes, indeed, I would see him in heaven. I wasn't sure what had happened or when it had happened that Roger would want to talk about these things with me. We'd never really done this before. But Roger freely talked about prayer times with Nell on the porch as they had their coffee. And we talked about the most important thing that there is together. It was the most wonderful conversation I'd ever had with Roger. And couldn't believe that it would be the last. I'm so very grateful that I had that moment in time with Roger, because now I don't have to wonder, where is Roger now? Will I ever see him again? I do have confidence, deep confidence, that I indeed will see him again. And having said that, I want to bring the conversation back around and talking to all of you just for a moment. I think most of us, if we would be honest with ourselves, would admit we're more middle class in spirit than we are poor in spirit. We tend to think that we are good people and that all good people go to heaven. God owes it to us for the good lives that we have led. None of us are murderers. We're not bank robbers, aside from exceeding the speed limit by a few miles per hour on a long trip or a short trip. Now, we really don't see ourselves as lawbreakers at all, and therefore we don't tend to see our need for a Savior. But we all have that need. All have sinned and have fallen short of the glory of God. Well, we've come to a place in the conversation where there's awkward silence. And now my phone is telling me there's a tornado warning in this area. I'll get back to the tornado in just a moment or two. But I want to conclude with these thoughts. You know, it's been said that all good things must come to an end. But if this is true, there really is no hope in this world or after this life. The best comfort we can hope for is the sentimental kind, where we remember the good old days for a few moments and then return to life as usual and try to get as much fulfillment out of life as we can. But there's another level of comfort that's based on something more substantive than sentiment. There is the comfort that comes with the deep theological truth of the resurrection. Living with only the perspective on life that comes through sentimentalism leaves us in a state of disappointment as we realize that our best days are behind us. But living with the hope of the resurrection of the dead means that our best days are not behind us. The best is yet to come.